Hello and welcome to tonight's Destiny movie night hangout.
Hello.
Hello. And tonight we're going to discuss the movie Fury, the newest Brad Pitt movie where he goes around in a tank shooting stuff in the Second World War. And with me here tonight I have two participants. I have Anna, partner, and I also have Carrie from Maine. Hello, Carrie.
Hello.
And you that are viewing this, you're able to go to our Google Plus account and click on the link there to participate live in the Hangout and ask us questions as we go along, and we'll answer them to the best of our ability. Okay, so let's get this going. So Anna, could you give us a synopsis of the movie?
Yeah, so it was quite interesting that you were saying, like the way that you described it, that it's the newest Brad Pitt movie where he drives around in a tank shooting stuff. Because from my perspective, and this might also be as a woman, I don't know, maybe Carrie has a different perspective or can shed some light on that as well. But I don't generally enjoy watching war movies. And so when I watched this, I was quite surprised at how it's not so much about war in the context of, like you said, driving around shooting stuff. At least not to me. It was actually more about what happens to the person in war, like what happens when you as a human being are in war. But anyway, so it is about Brad Pitt, and he is in a tank, and he is shooting stuff. But basically, it takes place by the very end in 1945 in Germany, close to the end of the Second World War. And Brad Pitt and a team of other soldiers are driving around in this tank, and he's the sergeant. Eh?
Tank commander.
Yeah, he's the commander of this little team. And so you follow them on their missions around Germany. Like they get these missions to clear places or defend places or save people. And then you follow this life that they have inside this tank. And, he has this group of guys with him, and then kind of one of the primary storylines of the movie is that a very young soldier joins their team. Another one in their team dies, and then they get this young soldier assigned. And he explains how he just 2 weeks prior he had some kind of desk job, and he was in no way expecting that he would be put on the front lines. But I mean, we can imagine that they're so far into the war that at this point they have to put everyone in. So they're putting in even like he was like, I don't know, barely 18, very very young guy. And then you see his total and utter shock of being thrown into war and having to live with these guys in this tank. And they've been together even in a prior war, or even from the beginning of the Second World War. But even in Africa, they were together and experienced that war. So they have like a special bond. And then in that tank, you then have all the different characters. Maybe we can talk more about that later. So basically, you follow them till the end of the war. And I don't know if we should give any spoilers of what happens.
Cool. So what we will dive into in this hangout is more the psychological aspects of war, not so much the effects of the movie or the acting capabilities, but more, what can we learn from this movie and how can we relate it to what goes on in reality. So, Carrie, I'll begin asking you, how is war depicted in this movie?
It's depicted as necessary, as a job that these men do. It doesn't necessarily glorify it like a lot of war movies do. So it's like a necessary evil kind of thing. That's how I saw it.
And how is the war depicted as influencing the characters? And I also know here that you do have some personal experiences of how war can affect individuals. So, I mean, what would you say happens to someone that is put in that position to kill people or be killed, in essence?
That's a really main part of the movie that they go into. The guys are like, you know, you've got to kill them or they're going to kill you, and you have to kill as many as you possibly can so we can get this done and we can get out of here.
Yeah.
So that's how they saw it. It was they had to completely separate themselves from the fact that they were taking human lives and they were just numbers. That's all they were. And what's interesting is that that separation is actually something that's created in their minds. And I've noticed this a lot with people that I know that have been to war. They just can't handle it. And someone quoted in the movie, you see it, your eyes see it, but your head can't make sense of it.
Yeah.
So they can't even process what they're seeing. So they'll put themselves into other things, other distractions. Like if you look around the tank, you'll see the pictures of girls and you'll see crosses hanging. And even when they're not fighting, they're out socializing, they're drinking, eating, having sex. And there was actually this one scene where the main character, the sergeant of the tank, he and that younger guy that you were talking about, the one that was, new and naive and had never seen war, they actually found this room where there were these two women, and they actually set up like this whole domestic play out where they had tea and the woman made them breakfast. You know, it was like living out, something just to forget what you were really doing in that moment.
Yeah.
And if you notice,
interesting.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Carrie. Sorry.
I was just going to, place it in terms of, where we are now with these men coming out of the war, and they come home, and that's the first thing they do is they head right towards that domestic bliss scenario for themselves.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that it's interesting what you said about this quote from the movie that your eyes see it, but your head can't wrap itself around it, and how that then creates like a split within yourself as a soldier or as something, which is the same, or similar that happens to people exposed to like extreme sexual abuse. But it's interesting that point of saying that your eyes see it, but it's like you don't process it because everything that we see, we do process, so that begs the question of how is it then being processed? But it's like it's not part of our conscious definition of ourselves, for example, that I'm not a killer. Because remember that young guy, he could not accept himself as a killer. He refused to accept that he has to be a killer. And then you had that other guy, the very like brutal guy who really embraced it. And it's interesting that point of how, no matter what, even when your head cannot wrap itself around it and you cannot identify with what's going on, it still gets processed. Like I was talking about before with sexual abuse victims, how they sometimes experience these physical reactions years after, where they don't maybe even consciously remember it, but the body remembers it. So it just goes to show also the extent of impact that war has on you, and then also like how can you possibly rationalize it in your mind? Like, so there was the one guy that was like this brutal guy, and then there was the religious guy, for example. So they each had like a coping mechanism through which they tried to, exactly as you said, wrap their heads around it so that they could go on living. Because if you cannot accept what's going on, how can you then go on living? Which is exactly what that young guy then, he wanted to die. Like, rather than having to kill another human being, he wanted to die.
Yeah. And I mean, it's an interesting point because it goes to show that, you know, we hide from what's really going on and what we've become through utilizing these, you know, justifications. We rationalize for ourselves. We make it okay in our heads. But the fascinating thing about war is that it's such an intense experience that, you know, the body picks it up on such a level that you can't really deceive yourself. I mean, if you look at people that come back from war, most of them have this post-traumatic stress, which goes to, I mean, which shows that the truth of what they have done is, you know, physically there. It's just that they are able to at least suppress it somewhat. So the next question, Carrie, would be, how is killing justified in the movie?
Kill or be killed, you know.
Yeah.
Let's get home. Let's get this done. It's a job.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's also something that I like about this movie, is that it's not trying to glorify. I mean, there is like a little bit of glorification where they're like, what is it that they say in the movie? This is the best job in the world.
This is the best job I've ever had.
But I'm pretty sure they mean it ironically.
Mantra.
But to a certain extent, compared to other war movies, they are not trying to glorify it or the people in it. You know, they are really approaching it like, and it's also interesting because Brad Pitt is not really, he's not really an officer. You know, it's just that all the other, like the higher ranking people, they've all died. So at some point he meets with another soldier, and they're like, he says, "Hi, hello, sir," or something to him, and then he goes, "I'm not a sir." Well, I'm not a sir either. So it's like you see this very, like, everyone is equal there on the batting field at this point in the war. They've been at it for 6 years, and then also you also see this confrontation between the American soldiers, or the armed, what do you call it, the Allies, and then the German soldiers, which is in several incidents in the movie, it turns out to be just kids, because all the adults male, or a lot of the adult males, have already died. So there is this, like, something important coming through from this movie is showing how, you know, we are equal. You know, that is a German boy, this is an American boy. It's completely pointless. We don't hate each other. We're not enemies, and yet I have to kill you or you will kill me.
Yeah. And I found it interesting, you know, what you said, Kira, about it's a job. Because, you know, if we look at that statement, it's a job, it sort of doesn't make any sense, you know. Just because someone tells me to do it, it's then acceptable and okay that I do it. It's like a fascinating point of how we justify things for ourselves. That when someone in an apparent authority position say do it, then we have some right to do it.
Yeah, also considering that you're actually giving your life, and even if you're not giving your life by dying, it will affect the rest of your life. You'll never be the same again. So is it just a job?
I can relate, though. I've been in jobs where I've been told to do things that aren't necessarily good for me. And I do it because it's, my job. It's what's best for whatever company that I'm working for, and it's best for the people that depend on me.
Yeah.
You don't really think about yourself at that point. It's just like, okay, this is what I have to do.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why I even allow that "or else" statement to exist within me. I have to look at that. But yeah, that's how I see it. I can relate with where he's coming from. And if you see how close they all are, people form bonds and relationships like that through being in stressful situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also experienced that the only joy or the only reason why I would stay at a certain job, even though I was maybe mistreated, was because of my colleagues. And you start, and I mean especially in such a situation with being a patriot and whatnot, you start developing this loyalty, where you can't. And I mean these guys, they couldn't have probably left even if they wanted to. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you leave, then you're court-martialed, and in those times you were probably shot.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting that we have created this system where we are so marginalized in a way that we just have to accept extremely unsatisfying conditions as, it's my job. So that brings me to the next question, and I would like to know, Carrie, if you have an answer to this: how come war exists when it's a proven fact that those participating in it, there are very few of them that actually want it and like it?
I have to take a really close, honest look at that one. Because I realize the wars that I create, with everyone around me, all the conflicts that I create in my head, and yeah, all the enemies that I make. It's like everyone's a threat in some way. And I mean, and if it's not in an actual physical way, well, I'm going to make it psychological or emotional or spiritual. And then I have to look at, why am I doing that? How is it benefiting me to do that in some way? And I was talking with some friends today, and we were actually discussing, that point, or I brought it up, that I'm not going to keep doing something unless it's benefiting me somehow.
Yeah.
So I guess the honest part I had to look at is this something I really enjoy when it comes down to it? Do I get pleasure in this on, some level of myself? Where I might like it that other people are wrong, that I am, and I was right about it all along. Or trying to think of another example. All that nastiness that comes up whenever you get in conflict with people. Why don't we stop it? Why do we go right into it? Are we addicted to being right? Or, what's going on there? And also, in the movie, the sergeant there asked that young guy, he said, so, how are you with this killing now? And he says, I'm okay with it. I actually liked it.
Yeah.
So that's a point that we have to look at for ourselves.
Yeah, look, the thing is that of course war on an external level, the drive of it exists at a systemic level between countries and market forces and religions. So at that point, it's like it's the system itself is going to war. The system that then has Germany on one side and the Allies on the other side, for example. But that doesn't just exist by itself. You know, it needs, or it cannot drive, or it doesn't function. It has no purpose or existence without human beings, without the soldiers that are doing the killing, without the officers that are giving the order, without the even further up the generals and the presidents who are signing off on it. And then if we take it even further back, like Carrie was talking about, it comes from ourselves. You know, everything that is in this system, in this world, comes from ourselves as human beings. So like Carrie says, if we want to know why war exists, we have to actually ask ourselves. And that's the challenging part, right? Because we can sit here and say, I would never kill another human being, or I would never go to war. But then, as you were saying, Carrie, we then see how we actually wage these mini wars with people in our everyday lives, even with ourselves. Even if in our own minds against ourselves or against our own bodies. So when we would do that to ourselves, it's not so strange that we together as humanity would do it on a systemic level. But it's like once it becomes systemic, it becomes so easy to say, when you're not directly involved with it, that I'm not part of that. Like, that's those brutes over there in that country. So that's quite interesting to take that journey from the war and back to where it all started, which is actually inside ourselves.
Yeah, it's a fascinating point. And it's also interesting to look at this, to ask the question, okay, but what do I benefit? Because, I mean, the first problem that we face in terms of asking ourselves that question is to be, you know, self-honest in recognizing that, okay, you know, in some aspects I am actually going to war, because I think many can have a difficulty to admit that. But when you made that sort of step, that okay, I can see that what I'm doing here is in fact an act of evil, to then ask that question, okay, but what do I get out of it? And what I found for myself is that what I do get out of it is often some form of experience, some form of energy. Maybe I feel excited, or I feel elevated, feel superior or something when I can, you know, say something to another that makes me feel like I have really placed him in his spot or something like that. So, and you know, when we see that, it's also easy to see that, okay, this energetic experience, I mean, it's not even real. It lasts, you know, for a moment, and then it's gone. And then I'll have made an imprint in this physical, actual reality that will many times stay, you know, maybe life out, because it will have, could have, consequential effect upon another, that they then make that a part of their character, and it influences their entire life from that point onwards. So that is interesting to see.
Yeah, this is also interesting in the context of soldiers now that are, maybe you can share more about that, Carrie, because we don't have an active military in Sweden, right?
We have a professional military.
Right, but Carrie, maybe you can share with us, because at least based on what I've read, there's like a lot of promotion going on in the States towards getting young men and women to go to war.
Any of the ads for it?
Yeah.
It's like this hardcore music, and you know, it makes it like this exciting job, and you're going to get an education, and you know, you're going to help improve the world or whatever. you'll be a true patriot, and all these ideas that are floating out around there. So their starting point is, service. Service to my people, keeping my people safe. And they get over there, and even the way they are treated is just horrific. Like, this one story my friend told me was every morning they had to go out and watch the dead bodies being carried to the helicopters. And they had to do it. And they had to stand there and watch until the helicopters were gone. And their friends are like dying right beside them. They'll be just doing something, random. Next thing you know, their friend's blown up. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, and nothing has prepared them, most likely, for what they're facing.
Yeah, and I see that their training, is tended to prepare them for certain jobs, like jumping out of, airplanes or blowing up bridges. And it's training that's focused on keeping them together as a team. That's the extent of it. Here's your job. Here's the people you're keeping alive. Here's the people that'll keep you alive. That's it. That's what they get.
It's interesting, this point of how war can only work as long as the majority of people participating in it, whether directly or indirectly, are, in a complete position of being followers, of being totally disempowered. Because what if these soldiers on either side of a conflict or a war would actually have been educated properly before they went into war? Like I was just looking at how this can only work because none of us learn to really take full responsibility for our own lives and decide, what our integrity is and what principles we will live by, and also understanding, the powers that affect the world. Like, if we really understood that, would we then go into war? Would we then follow in this way?
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting to look at who is it that goes into war. And in today's world, the man or woman that goes into war is often have a low income, have very few options for the future, and no education, and is stuck in that lower part of society where they really are not ever given a chance to develop themselves. And so the military is for many a way out. And I know that in America, for example, they promised the soldiers a university education, right?
Yes.
So that is interesting, that soldiers is also an outflow of a unequal system, particularly in how money is distributed in this world.
Yeah, they don't make that much money either. A lot of their families are on food stamps or public assistance, so they're not even making enough.
Yeah, and then it's like, you'll come home a hero, and then you come home and you blew your leg off, or you lost an arm or whatever, and you can never get a proper job again, or your mind is just completely blown away, and there's just no help. No one cares.
Yeah, you're an alcoholic. You're a drug addict. You can't go to sleep at night. That's another thing, they can't sleep.
Yeah.
All these images just keep coming up.
Yeah.
of everything they see. You can't function. So it's just one of those points of where it's just one of those things that has to change, period.
Yeah. Yeah,
We're
I
going
mean,
to have to stop this.
war is really one of those points that are genuinely unacceptable. Like, there is nothing about war that can be changed into some form of
Right.
beneficial solution. It's just the entire point of war is, you know, it's like abusive straight through.
I absolutely agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, for example, if we were to again compare these externalized wars with, for example, our conflicts in our relationships, there that can be transformed into, for example, effective education. Or no, I meant I have education on my brain. I meant effective communication, which is kind of the same, but where it's like you can transform those conflicts into constructive discussions where you can get to solutions. But the problems with these externalized wars is that they often don't even have any ground, you know. So it's kind of like, you know, conflicts in relationships that are based on, that doesn't have any foundation, where it's just screaming and yelling for the sake of screaming and yelling, but where there's no ground in it. You know, like wars where we then later find out that the powers that be actually funded the other side and gave them weapon or whatever, or, you know, like, who even knows like what the purpose is anymore. And we say that it's for our freedom. You know, everyone says that it's for the freedom of their people, but to me it certainly seems like the more war we have, the less free people are. So it doesn't make any sense. Like, when has war ever freed people?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a complete opposite of what we see things as what they really are.
So I would like to go back to the movie and now focus more on the new recruit, the guy that is assigned completely fresh. And Carrie, how do you see that this guy is indoctrinated, or sort of how
Yeah,
is how is he made part of the group, and how does that change his character? What is it that happens there?
he's forced to do his job, forced to do the job that the rest of them are doing. They can't even handle him not being like they are. When he first comes on the scene, they're just, you know, they start hounding him with questions, and then they're like, well, we just don't give an F about really anything that you have to say.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
crying.
Yeah, you just have to be one of us now. Deal with it. Welcome
Yeah.
home, you know.
I don't want to be
That's,
here.
yeah, I'm not supposed to be here. Deal with it. You know,
Yeah.
there was no, I mean, I think there was a part of them, or you could see a part of them that was somewhat empathetic, like, because obviously that was their starting point as well. And there was also, you know, a couple of other dimensions, like, okay, we need this guy to really step it up here, or he's going to get us killed.
Yeah, because he was refusing to shoot. And
Yeah,
then because of that, because it was actually, he saw a kid, a German kid in the bushes, and then he hesitated and he didn't shoot. And then as a consequence of those actions, the tank behind of them got blown up.
yeah, they needed to know that he was one of them and that he had their back. So that happens a lot in the world, you know. You're either with us or you're against us.
Yeah.
What's the other term? Uh, if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah. And he couldn't beat them.
No.
Right, no way.
Yeah, and I found that the movie portrayed this really well. Like that moment of finding yourself in a situation where there is no out, there is no escape, and a lot of it also has to do with, you know, facing imminent death and torture and pain, because that's, you know, he goes from being like a normal American kid, and then he's thrown into like the front lines of World War II, you know, having to face the possibility that he will most likely be dead. And you know, and he struggles with that, like he will not accept it, but you know, it's, and that's actually something we discussed when we saw the movie, in that, you know, it is not acceptable, but you know, he is in that situation. He doesn't have any choice but to deal with it. And I think that many of us have found ourselves in such situations in our lives where, you know, it's too late to change it. Now you have to walk with the consequences. And that was quite interesting to see in how Brad Pitt as his sergeant, because this kid, he's refusing to kill. And Brad Pitt, you know, is not like a bad guy, like you were saying, Carrie. You could see that he has empathy for him. And it's like he instinctively understands that he has to get this kid through this point, both for the survival of the team, but also because there's no other option. He cannot opt out. He cannot leave the war. So in the context of that situation, he has to learn how to kill. And that is, I mean, that's really extreme, that we have to be put in such situations. He has to step over that line within himself and do it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, it goes to show that, you know, when you're in manifested consequence, at that point it's really too late to do anything, which, well, it's something that I can see in my own world as well. You know, for example, if I have a fight with someone and they decide that from then on they will not, you know, have a relationship with me anymore, then that point is manifested consequence. And you know, that also shows in terms of how we can tackle these points, such as war, and we can also bring in other problems in the world. So, for example, terrorism or violence, that at the point of happening, it's already too late. You know, the action to prevent such points must be prevention.
Yeah.
So, you know, a war is not created, for example, when the declaration of war is made. It's created maybe 100 years
or
before,
aeons.
or aeons.
Eons.
Yeah, he had absolutely no control over his life.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, there, you know, he's just a little tiny piece in a game that's just boop, knocked over.
Yeah.
And that point of manifested consequence is huge, because we're so separated from that. We're the ones that are actually causing this, and we're the ones that will actually have to stop it.
Yeah.
You know, and until we do, these people are going to keep dying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it could be you, it can be me, you know, it's not, like, it doesn't really matter.
So we are reaching the end of our hangout, and as a final question, I'd like to ask, what is it that we can take with us from this movie? And what would you say, Anna?
What can we take with us from this movie? Well, what I took with me, like I said in the beginning of the hangout, is that I got a little bit deeper perspective into what it's actually like to be a soldier in war. And I mean, from documentaries that I've seen, I know that to a certain extent this doesn't even come close to what is actually going on right now, like with child soldiers in various countries in the world that are forced to rape and kill. And so it actually made me very much aware that, you know, this is not a World War II issue, and it's kind of weird how much we tend to focus on this World War II when there's just continuously and constantly wars going on right now. And so I had, this movie gave me this like awareness with these people, and seeing that the German guy and the American guy are equal. They're both caught up in this completely unnecessary conflict that neither of them have initiated on a personal level. And so I find that it's like it's supportive to see that also in the light of the context of the terror attack here in France the other day, and how we then tend to go into these, you know, camps of either being with this group or being with that group, when in fact it's the exact same. You know, these are young men, or like it just goes to show that we as humanity are doing this to ourselves, and it's brutal, and like you said, it's unacceptable and it's unnecessary. So we have to focus on ways to preventing the wars that are not here yet, and stopping the consequences of the wars that are already here.
Well, and Carrie?
I totally agree with Anna. And I got the same awareness. It was just a tiny glimpse of what's going on inside the minds of people, in the lives of people that are in war. It was like just a tiny part.
Yeah.
And you know, like you and Victor, I saw it and I was just like, this is just completely unacceptable. This has to stop. You know, how is this going to stop, and why did I ever think this was okay to begin with? And that's the point that has to stop. The justifications and any beliefs that I may have made up or seen on TV or anything like that about how this is for the better good, or this is going to keep us safe, or this is going to be our freedom, or this is going to get us resources, you know, so that we're better off in the future.
Yeah.
It's just got to stop. There's, just like you said, there's no way that we can turn war around and turn it into something that benefits humanity. We can work with, you know, psychopaths and make more progress with a psychopath than we can with this point. You know, that's what I got out of it.
Cool. And
what did you get out of it?
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I could also, well, what I saw was also sort of how meaningless it is. Because when, for example, when I went to school and you read in the books, there you read about the wars, and there seemed to be some sort of meaning, because they have placed some sort of ideological value on the point. For example, the Allies won the war. But when you zoom into the specifics and the situations that actually made up the war, it's just like, what's going on? They just kill each other. Yeah. So on that level, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, and like you were saying, Carrie, with the rationalization, it's like made into something intellectual, you know, where it's like, and I was just thinking about how every single small child under the age of 5 can see the utter stupidity in war. Like, if you talk to a small child, they will go like, what? Why do people do that? That's stupid. Why don't they stop? And that's common sense. And then we go like, no, listen, you know, it is much more complex than that. You will understand when you're older. Like, we take on this, like, as though it's so adult and it's so sophisticated and it's super complex, when it's not really. It's super stupid. And we don't have to live like that. And we can just look at the consequences. Is it creating freedom? No. Is it creating peace? No. Is it creating happiness? No. Okay. So that's the, then, you know, we can find a different way. And if we can do it in our own minds, like you were saying, Carrie, if we can do it in our relationships with other people on a personal level, then we can surely do it in our global system and in our political systems.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here. And next week we'll have a hangout with Talamon, and he'll be the host. He hasn't yet selected a movie, so I don't know what it will be about. And for viewers, don't forget to subscribe. We'll have a steady flow of hangouts here on this channel, various topics. And yeah, thank you for participating and watching.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Victor.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Gary.
Bye-bye.
Bye.